Hi folks, Seth Leibsohn here. Thanks for watching my monologue. In these uncertain times, you may be thinking about personal protection. If you are, I urge you to visit my friends at Guns Etc. They'll help you find the perfect protection for yourself and your family, and they can even teach you how to use it. They've been protecting Arizonans for over 33 years, and they stand for the great principles this country was founded upon. Or you can just click on gunsetc.com. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back, and happy Friday, December 18th, 2020. It's a year of a lot of loss, including conservative loss, including the second assassination of Abraham Lincoln. On our contemporaries, my friend Tevi Troy runs the list in a column deserving repetition here. For here, too, the honorable finds its due, or should, to wit. Conservatives got an inkling of how bad 2020 would be before the year even started. On December 30th, 2019, Gertrude Himmelfarb died. She was just the first of many conservative luminaries to die over the next 12 months, and it is worth remembering each one and what they contributed to conservatism in our country. As conservatism enters its next chapter, learning lessons from these heroes of the past can potentially be a first step in discerning the way forward into the future. Let's start with Himmelfarb, an eminent historian and also wife of the late Irving Kristol. She wrote scholarly and compelling works about anti-Semitism in the Victorian era that always had contemporary relevance. Even those who disliked her politics could not question her scholarship, as the New York Times acknowledged in its obituary of Himmelfarb. She viewed the growing absence of footnotes in scholarly books as a moral lapse. Owen Harris was another conservative who died in 2020. He was at the helm of the National Interest when it published the most famous article in its history, and one of the most famous articles in the history of any magazine, Francis Fukuyama's 1989 essay, The End of History. That piece was famous then. In retrospect, it had a lot of flaws, but it dominated the year of conservative thinking, talking, and publishing. The writing world also lost Sir Roger Scruton, British conservative and author of more than 50 books. Scruton became a conservative in reaction to the 1968 student protesters, whom he aptly characterized as an unruly mob of indulgent middle-class hooligans, putting forth ludicrous Marxist gobbledygook. He was staunchly anti-communist, and Czech President Václav Havel gave Scruton the Medal of Merit for his pro-dissident efforts. He was also knighted in 2016. Scruton, in the words of British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, upon the announcement of Scruton's death, was, quote, the greatest modern conservative thinker and a man who not only had the guts to say what he thought, but said it beautifully. Knighted even earlier than Roger Scruton was Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, who died of pancreatic cancer at age 72. Rabbi Sachs was the West's leading defender of family, faith, and Western civilization itself. While for many years the chief rabbi of England, his wit and erudition gave his ideas wide purchase beyond just the confines of the Jewish world. As Joe Lieberman said of him, the old advertising slogan went, you don't have to be Jewish to love Levi's Jewish rye. Well, you don't have to be Jewish to benefit from Rabbi Sachs's writing. Tevi once saw him after reading his book, The Home We Built Together, and told him that I admired his use of a quote on tolerance from William James. The art of being wise is the art of knowing what to overlook. Without missing a beat, he said correctly, easy to say, hard to do. Generally loath to talk about politicians in a piece about great conservatives, since as William Rusher once observed, politicians will always disappoint. But two conservative senators who died in 2020 merit mention. Roger Jepsen of Iowa was an early supporter of Ronald Reagan and more unusually a supporter of Israel when that was not the norm in Republican politics. Jepsen was also early to recognize the power of the evangelical vote in advancing conservative policies. And of course, those last two were intertwined, as evangelical support for Israel has been instrumental to the Republican Party. This was not the case in Jepsen's time, but support for Israel is one of the few near universal tenets of both the Republican Party and conservatism in our current movement that has its divides. Another senator who belongs on this list is Oklahoma's Dr. Tom Coburn, tagged as Dr. No by friends and enemies alike for his refusal to go blithely along with massive spending bills. Coburn believed in conservative ideas and was willing to flout certain Senate traditions to show it, but he was always a gentleman. As American politics became increasingly less collegial in recent years, notice that the most hysterical anti-Coburn critics in his first years eventually came to appreciate his willingness to debate and befriend, if not compromise, with senators on the other side of the aisle. The ill-fated 2020 also saw the death of Herman Cain. Cain was a businessman who aspired to serve his fellow citizens at the highest level, but was unsuccessful in his runs for the White House and the Senate. He initially came to prominence as a business owner by publicly challenging Bill Clinton over his health care plan in 1994, saying, quote, "If I'm forced to do this, what will I tell those people whose jobs I will have to eliminate?" Close quote. This appearance helped launch a career as a talk radio host, newspaper columnist, book author, and presidential candidate. It was while pursuing the GOP nomination that he touted his 999 tax plan. Cain was not the only influential conservative radio host who died in 2020. New York City's Barry Farber, who spoke 20 languages, was also fluent in the vernacular of the disaffected urban intellectuals who left the Democratic Party. Farber ran unsuccessfully for office twice, but scored a moral victory in his 1970 race for Congress by holding ultra-liberal Bella Abzug to only 52% of the vote in her heavily Democratic district. Like Farber, the country singer Charlie Daniels, who died this year at 83, also tried to speak to regular folks with lyrics such as, "I ain't nothing but a simple man, they call me a redneck, I reckon that I am." He showed an understanding of how to reach non-coastal Americans long before the recent interest in books such as J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy. Abigail Thernstrom, who died in April at 74, tried to find a common man approach on issues of race. She started out on the left, but migrated to the right on the basis of data and analysis, moving away from her early days in a Marxist commune. The key insight that led her to her migration, along with that of her husband, the historian Stephen Thernstrom, was her research-based findings that race-based policies had limited benefits for those they were supposed to help and brought with them significant costs. She was never a staunch conservative and long had arguments with people on both the right and the left, but she was always winsomely iconoclastic. She used to keep a portrait of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas above her fireplace for a very specific reason, as she said, to make reporters faint. As if to punctuate 2020's challenges, this past month brought with it 3 more painful losses: Walter Williams, Bruce Hershenson, and Ed Lazaire. Williams was a libertarian economist who taught at George Mason, but was better known as an author, syndicated columnist, and popular guest host for Rush Limbaugh. Like many of the other conservatives mentioned here, he started out liberal but moved in a conservative direction when encountering the realities of the world. As Williams put it, quote, "I probably became a libertarian through exposure to tough-minded professors who encouraged me to think with my brain instead of my heart," close quote. Hershenson, like Cain and Farber, was a radio personality who was unsuccessful in his attempts to run for public office, but successful in getting his message out. He was also a filmmaker, White House aide to Richard Nixon, and a nurturing mentor to young conservatives, people like Troy Seneca. Seneca recalled in a moving tribute that Hershenson got him his job as a White House speechwriter by forwarding a paper Seneca had written to George W. Bush's chief speechwriter without Seneca's permission. As Seneca wrote, "If your only examples of conservatism in the 1980s were Ronald Reagan and Bruce Hershenson, you could be forgiven for believing that all Republicans had a low resting heart rate, a quick wit, great hair, and a voice that sounded like God after a glass of wine." The conservatives mentioned above, scholars and amplifiers alike, can help provide a model for conservatism today and how to build things back and how to move forward. So much is written these days about the splits in the movement, of which there are many, but as 2020 comes to a close, it's worth reflecting on the fallen heroes from years past who helped build a movement and the successes of the things that they did build and hold together. Which brings me back to the second killing of Abraham Lincoln, as is being done in San Francisco. The names, committee chairman in San Francisco for the schools there said, quote, Lincoln did not show through policy or rhetoric that black lives ever mattered to him, close quote. And so his name will be gone at school there. You've heard me talk a lot about how the modern progressives have adopted the philosophy of the Confederacy on a lot of issues, be it race, history, and the founding. The second killing of Abraham Lincoln is just one more example. I'm Seth Leibsohn. We'll be right back.